My name is Jennifer, and I work for a company called TrueView. And today I'm just going to talk about how selecting the right materials can protect artworks and heritage without negatively impacting audience experience. So this time, a quick show of hands if you've ever heard of TrueView. Okay, there's a few of you. But for those of you who do not know who TrueView is, we are an American manufacturer of glass and acrylic products for display situations, primarily used in the art and heritage world. Now, within TrueView, we have a fine art and museums team, the majority of whom have either an art background, a museums background, maybe a conservation background. We've got curators. We've got someone who worked at Christie's. I'm one of those fine art team members. Right at the back is my colleague, Andrew. He's another member. And our role is really to provide education on TrueView products, but also to provide advice in their use in different display situations. So we quite frequently will go into a museum, walk through a gallery space with either the conservators or curators, and talk about the different options you might have. And we work all over the world. We actually sell through distribution. We don't sell direct. And we have distributors in more than 50 countries all around the world. An extra benefit of this is that we get to experience how our products are being used in some very different situations. So for today's presentation, spoiler alert, it is going to be about glazing. And it is not really going to be about when you should glaze an artwork or when you shouldn't. It's really a bit unfortunate. But I think with increased access, strict budgets, environmental pressures, and even more increasingly with protests, that glazing a collection is important for security and protection. Although everyone would love to experience something without anything in between them, it does definitely add that protection. And if you've decided that glazing, whether it's a frame for a picture, building an entire wall, or having a more discreet display case is the way you want to go, which glazing product you choose is going to depend on several factors. Now, ideal world, you would have a product that's going to give very high protection. It's not going to affect the viewer of that piece, and it's going to be affordable, and it's going to fit within your institution's sustainability guidelines. Now, perfect product, does it exist? Most likely, you're going to have to weigh up all of those factors and just try and find a balance between them. And that's what I'm kind of going to try and do today, is give you just some ideas of how to weigh up different factors and how different products might contribute to those. I'm not really going to talk specifically about TrueView products. I will mention a couple of them. It's just going to be a much more general presentation. So this is the invisible part of the presentation. When it comes to trying to minimize the impact of glazing, really one of the first things you can do is try and reduce reflections using a low reflective glazing. The effect you will see does quite often depend upon your lighting situation. So you do kind of need to look at a low reflective glazing in combination with what lighting setup you have. And I also want to just point out that there's a difference between non-glare, which is an older, more matte or fuzzy-like glass or acrylic material, and then what might be called anti-reflective or low reflective. The anti-reflective and low reflective uses something called optical interference to try and reduce the reflections. So if you have a low reflective glazing and you have the perfect lighting setup, sometimes people might not even realize the glass is there. It can truly be invisible. And usually that even happens with me. I'll be walking into a museum and I'll kind of be at a weird angle to see if I can see any lights reflected. The perfect setup is great. If you have light coming from across a gallery space or windows, you might still see some reflections. So then the other side that can affect how you view an artwork involves two factors, and that's really within the protection side. So you've got the UV blocking, and the amount of UV blocking, the higher the UV blocking potential, then there is a chance you could have a color shift. And that's where you hold up a piece of glazing, it might seem slightly yellow or slightly gray. And that, is effective having the UV protection there. And then with the impact resistance, the higher the impact resistance, typically the thicker the glazing. So obviously the thicker the glazing, potentially the less light that's getting through it. And so that will really affect the colors of the artwork or the object that you see. So moving on to sustainability and budget. And there are really many different things that we can look at here, but three big things are energy consumption, waste generation, and then budget and funding. I think I'd be surprised if anyone's shocked here that there's a growing consensus in the museum field for a more responsible use of energy, reducing the amount of waste, and then being fiscally responsible. But institutions need to achieve all that whilst balancing the high standards of preservation. And so museums are exploring low and passive energy solutions. This could be the building itself, looking at insulation of a building, looking at the exterior windows of the building, how much air exchange is getting through, are there vestibules, things like that. And then within the building, looking at the use of microclimates to maintain environmental conditions. And then in terms of waste generation, some of the biggest challenges for museums are temporary exhibitions, loans, transportation, and then packaging that comes both with those and just the purchase of products. A lot of these activities end up producing single-use waste, but there are reusable options, and that's kind of going to be an emphasis of what I'm talking about. Really, that long-term thinking is critical to sustainability, and that long-term planning can aid museums in making both fiscally responsible and sustainable decisions. So, how does glazing fit into all of that quest for a sustainable museum? As I mentioned, energy consumption is a major contributor to museums' carbon footprint, and it's also quite often one of the largest costs. Now, while artworks and objects with cultural value often require environmental conditions to maintain their preservation, and there is work being done on how exact those environmental conditions need to be, it can be very difficult and costly to maintain temperature and relative humidity in a large building, and particularly a historic large building. So microclimates are either display cases or frames with little or no air exchange, and they can either be passively controlled or actively controlled to maintain a relative humidity and temperature inside. And that really provides a localized environment for the artworks, and uses significantly less energy than regulating a condition of a building. Now, when it comes to the glazing that you use in these, whether you want a completely sealed environment or whether you're just wanting a little air exchange, that is going to affect whether you use a glass or acrylic. So all acrylic, including ours that has coatings on it, is still permeable to water vapor. It's a very tiny amount, but there is some getting through. So if you want a completely sealed case with no air exchange, or you're using nitrogen to create an anoxic environment, then really you need to use glass. And this here is a study comparing the energy consumption for a whole gallery, or one using microclimates, cases, and frames. And you can see that the energy saving is significant, definitely reducing the carbon footprint, but it's maintaining the standards for the works in those cases and frames. And obviously, the other side benefit is protection from vandalism, incidental touch, pests, dust, and then other environmental pollutants. And if it's a UV protective glazing material, then ultraviolet radiation. So TrueView, we have a whole range of glass and acrylic products. As I mentioned, they're designed for framing and display applications. Two of the ones we're most well known for and most used by museums and heritage institutions are Optium Museum acrylic and UltraView laminated glass. These kind of combine all of the factors. So they're UV protective, they're impact resistant, they're abrasion resistant, anti-static. And it can be very tempting when we're thinking about sustainability goals and comparing using glass and acrylic to prioritize the use of a glass. Glass is often seen as the more sustainable option, and I think there's very much a negative opinion of plastics. But I do want to point out that if you are buying a very high performance glass, it is still going to have a very energy demanding production process. Both of them, their production has a relatively large carbon footprint. Now, glass obviously comes from a natural source, but it does actually require more energy and higher temperatures than a plastic to melt and be formed. Acrylic, obviously, it's oil-based. But it is half the weight of the glass. Now, this also reduces handling and transportation costs, not only with production, but also when it's being used later on. And especially if you're thinking of a loan or a traveling exhibition, this can be important. So all I would say on that side is definitely weigh everything up. It's not just simple as glass is better than acrylic in every situation. And I would really urge everyone to kind of then think long term. At TrueView, all of our glass and acrylic products, particularly the ones designed for the museum world, are designed to perform long term. And part of that is because of how we coat the product. We use something called sputter coating. If anyone works in the science department of a museum and you've made samples to look at under scanning electron microscopy, it's a very similar technology. We just do it on a very large scale. Our coater is about the size of 2 football fields in length. And the product is under vacuum for most of that length. So that's kind of, you can start to see where the energy usage comes in. But what that does mean is that the coating is very robust. It is physically and chemically bonded to the substrates. So it's designed to really last as long as the substrate will last. So in thinking long term, shifting from single use to multiple use is a key element of sustainability when it comes to glazing materials. There are many museums that store glazing sheets and display cases for reuse in future exhibitions. The image you see here is at the Art Institute of Chicago. Every pink sheet there is Optia Museum acrylic sheet that has been wrapped, and they keep a record of which frames and sizes it can go to. Now, to consider if a product is suitable for long-term use, because I'm not expecting everyone to only just look at TrueView products. You might be looking at all sorts out there. There are really three aspects of material testing that I would recommend looking at. And the first is the stability of the material and how it will interact with items in a collection. So testing such as ODI testing, PAT, they're just two examples of how we can look at if a material is safe for use in exhibitions and display settings. Asking the questions such as if an artwork comes into direct contact with the material, plus what if it is just in the vicinity, will that material off gas? And then the second aspect is the physical durability of the product. That's kind of its initial physical durability. What will happen as someone cleans it? They're cleaning it every day if you've got a really busy exhibition. What if, despite all of the cleaning protocols you've given the staff, they use something different? And how is it made? So one thing I like to tell people is that if people are familiar with UV protective films that you put on windows, those are very different to how we coat glazing. So a protective film on the window might last 2 to 5 years. Our product's designed for significantly longer. And then the final aspect to look at when thinking long-term is just how will that material change with extended exposure to both light and humidity. For this, we use artificial aging experiments to simulate what that could be like in a lab environment. Now, it's a lab, so these tests aren't perfect. Just because it performs that way in the lab isn't a guarantee, but it does give us a really good indication of how something might behave over long term. And you can see on the left here, it's just an example of some of the testing that we do for our products. Investing in products that last longer and meet these testing requirements, it can come at an initial expense. I'm not going to lie, some of the products that we make are very expensive and can seem like a big investment. But if they are usable for a longer time, then this can spread the cost over multiple exhibitions and also reduce waste. I think we can all agree that funding for most museums is very tight. Not all museums, but most museums. And it can be hard to cover budget even in the short term, let alone think about an exhibition that hasn't yet occurred, might not even have a theme. But as we move towards sustainability and reducing waste, thinking long term can help in these areas and eventually pay dividends with future budget discussions. Another thing is thinking for more general and less very specific kind of case environments. So if you have dimensions that can accommodate a range of different artworks or objects that then can be reused, it's another way to cut down on waste and cost. So on the topic of budgets, I've got kind of two things for you. I just want to take a moment to highlight our grant scheme with the Institute of Conservation. The next round of applications for this will be opening soon. Aimed at helping smaller institutions, awardees get some free TrueView material. It's worth up to about £4,000. And then they also get funding to cover materials, supplies, and support. The QR code on the screen takes you to the website. If you go to the website, you'll see it says applications have closed. That's from a previous round. They're opening again soon. You can also get details on past projects, and Icon are here on stand X8, so you can always go ask them questions. We can be asked questions too. We're on stand C2. And also, if you visit us on our stand, we are continuously trying to innovate at TrueView. And at the moment, we've got several products under consideration. And on the sustainability front, this includes some recycled acrylic, both UV protective and anti-reflective. So if you have time and want to come look at these products, I would be very grateful. We've got a quick questionnaire. It's 3 questions on a product. And if you fill that out, we can send a free piece of our Optium Museum acrylic to wherever you work. And so thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions. I think we've got maybe 5 minutes. 5-ish minutes.
Yeah, we've got about 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was really interesting. Does anyone have any questions from the floor? No. Is that a hand? That's a scratch. No, I possibly do, if that's all right. If you could tell us about, I was interested, you're obviously at the very forefront of all these incredible ways that you're developing the acrylics and the glass. What are the next steps? Where is next in going?
Oh, well, we always get asked to go bigger. So I think particularly with contemporary art, works are getting bigger. So that's one thing. I think on the recycled front, making both product that can be recycled, ours currently can be recycled and repurposed, but trying to integrate more recycled materials into our daily working and our actual main product line would be great.
Absolutely. I mean, sustainability, I think at the minute is at the forefront of everyone's mind. So I'm not surprised. Yeah. Is there any more just before we end the session? No. Thank you very much.